Well, interestingly enough, just in the last week, we've actually seen a slight uptick in the number of earthquakes at Mauna Loa. What we're looking at here is a plot of earthquakes per week for Mauna Loa going back to mid-2013, so about 3 years of record here. And as we discussed last fall, prior to mid-2014, we were locating about 10 earthquakes per week under the volcano. That number began to increase in mid-2014, and by the fall of 2015, we were averaging something on the order of 40 earthquakes per week. That's when we raised the alert level for the reason of this increased seismicity, but also because we were seeing deformation of the volcano at the same time, basically swelling of the edifice of the volcano as magma was accumulating at shallow levels. Well, soon after we raised the alert level, the number of earthquakes we began locating started to tail off. And so over the last 6 months or so, we've actually been on a downward trend, although as you can see in this plot, it was not a steady trend. There were periods of slightly higher activity dips, higher activity dips. So this is actually a very interesting pseudo-periodicity that we don't really understand. It may or may not be meaningful, but one of the things we're contemplating is what that signifies. But as I said, about a week ago, we had a sudden burst of activity on the west flank of Mauna Loa, and that's shown here in this plot, putting us back up above the 40 earthquakes per week again. So it's still too early to tell, but we might be in a phase of increasing seismicity again. I think the important point is that even though we've seen a decrease from the high levels of last late summer and fall, we're still above the sort of long-term background rate of 10 or so earthquakes per week. So the volcano is still clearly restless. And then, as I also indicated, in addition to seeing the earthquake activity continue, we've continued to see the volcano deform. Using our GPS network and tilt meters, we're seeing the volcano change shape, basically inflate as magma accumulates in the shallow reservoir. So that process has been continuing, even with these changes in seismicity for the last several years. Well, we would still say that there's no indication an eruption is imminent, and that's the most important point. Before an eruption were to happen, we would certainly expect to see more earthquakes than we're seeing now, larger earthquakes than we're seeing now, and sustained rates of earthquakes, so not this sort of oscillating levels. Just for comparison, before the last two eruptions of Mauna Loa in 1975 and in 1984, we saw magnitudes 3s and 4s, and then in 83, we had a high magnitude 6 right before, a couple of months before the eruption. So we're not seeing the size of earthquakes yet that would be likely to happen before an eruption. In addition, before the 75 eruption, we started seeing hundreds of earthquakes per day for many days, weeks before the eruption actually happened. So in sum, we expect to see a lot more seismicity. We also would expect to see sustained deformation, and then in the hours before the eruption, a very rapid increase in deformation as the magma is moving those last few kilometers to the surface. Mauna Loa is a very well-monitored volcano. Right now we have 15 seismometers on the volcano, 28 continuously recording GPS instruments, and 6 tilt meters and 3 strain meters. So we have a lot of sensors on the volcano, and this should give us good lead time before we move towards an eruption. The other thing that's important to note is that we are still trying to expand these networks. As our funding and time allow, we're hoping this summer to add a couple of additional web cameras, additional real-time gas monitoring equipment up there, and then over the next couple of years with funding, some additional seismometers and GPS. So we're increasing our ability to detect changes more rapidly.